In this video, I'm going to walk through the group by clause using and showing kind of how it works step by step using the distinct keyword as well as part of the select list. So ultimately, what I'm trying to kind of drive home is that when you request an aggregation function in the select list and ultimately want to perform that aggregation across values of another field, which is a group by, the number of records that is output represents the unique values for the field or fields across which the aggregation function is grouped. And so we'll just introduce the distinct keyword, which I haven't shown yet or in any prior video, because ultimately, once you know the group by and kind of and count, right, you can kind of perform the same action, but in a way that ultimately gives you even more information. That's not to say that I don't use it in practice. Usually I want to know what are the possible values for a field. And so that's what the distinct keyword really allows you to do. So I've already set my database here. And just looking through the distinct keyword in the select list, we just essentially request select distinct. So we want ultimately distinct values for the field city. I did suppress the where clause just for the purposes of this example, and then we're ultimately going to order put the values for the field city in alphabetical order. And so when we run this, we're going to see something like 575 rows, which each represents each record will represent a distinct value or a unique value for the field city, and then ultimately sorted in A to Z. And we can see here that each one of these records is a city name that is distinct or different from the next. And so 575 unique values or 575 possible values for the field city in the person.address table. And so we're going to introduce the where clause here, which is part of the query. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to is the query that's been reviewed in all the lectures I've done up to this point, which is counting the number of records for each value of city, where the values for the field, state, province ID are equal to 79. So going back to the distinct example, we're going to introduce the where clause. So now we're essentially working with the same subset of records that the query in the lecture is working on, so the group by and the aggregation function. So when we run this query, we're going to see ultimately that 48 records are returned. And so if you've already watched some of the other group by lectures, you'll notice that the values for the field city are familiar: Anna Cortez, Ballard, Bellevue, Bellingham. And you'll see that there, as displayed in the output window, there are 48 unique values. And so what does this mean? When we perform a group by or an aggregation function over values of the field city with the same where clause, we're ultimately going to see 48 records returned. The addition will be, in this particular example, we put the count first. We can always alter the order of the output by altering the order of the select list. So I'll just do that quickly. So ultimately, what we're going to see, aside from or beside each unique value of city, is the results of an aggregation function. So, for example, we're going to count the number of records for each value of city. And so when we run this, we're going to see the same number of records returned, but next to it will be the number of records from the table source with the state province ID equal to 79. Account ultimately of those records with each value of the city displayed in the output window. So I saved it, didn't run it. So in the city here, we see that this is exactly the same as what we saw before, values for the field city, 48 records, but now we ultimately have a count of the individual records from the table source that each have a value of this city. And we can introduce other aggregation functions as well. For example, if you recall the modified date field, you could perform a minimum, take a minimum value of that field and request it. Let's see here. SQL is giving me a syntax error. I don't know what I did wrong. Modified date field is an invalid. So we'll take a look. This is kind of working in practice to see why modified date is. I know why. I'm used to personally having underscores for our field names in lieu of spaces. I know that the AdventureWorks database ultimately does not use any kind of underscores in their field names. So that's the reason that it wasn't found in the original table. So if we do this, we're going to see unique values for the field city, the record count, and basically the earliest modification date for each value of city. Remember that each aggregation is applied to each individual grouped by criteria, or each value for the groupings. So there are 48 values returned. And then the last thing I want to ultimately show is that the distinct keyword, when you start doing a grouping, an aggregation function across unique values for a field, is redundant. So we're going to get the same example, or same output that we did above, essentially. I can add this just to show that it's exactly the same. So, well, let me just, I guess I'll just copy the whole select list and then introduce the distinct keyword here. And so when I do that, the output here is going to ultimately be the same output that we saw before. So the distinct keyword is redundant. It's not necessary in the query. SQL is showing me syntax error because I also copied and pasted over the table source, which comes before the from clause after the select list. So if I run this just to show, reiterate, that's the same exact output. So the distinct keyword is essentially redundant, right? So we're going to get the same exact thing if we comment that out.